Hello and welcome. I hope you enjoyed the conference so far. I'd like to welcome you to this particular session, which will probably be a little bit different from the ones that you already had a chance to listen to. So this will be about Ansible, and Ansible is not usually associated with VMware stack or infrastructure. At least I did not consider it to be an automation tool of choice for the infrastructure bit or the VMware bit for some time. For some reason, I always associated Ansible with something more for the programmers, but since I got to learn Ansible a few months back, I actually just changed my mind. And at the moment, I believe that Ansible is a very good tool, especially for, well, maybe not the biggest environments. Like I wouldn't recommend Ansible for enterprise level environments, but for small to medium or tests environments within an enterprise level infrastructures, it's pretty much perfect. So this session is made up basically of two parts. So firstly, I'll try to do like a crash course on Ansible. So you'll know what Ansible is, what are the different components of Ansible, how to start with it, and what's needed to get it running. And hopefully we'll have enough time to go through all of this, and hopefully that will provide us with a base needed to understand how Ansible can be used on infrastructure level and how can it be used to improve our VMware management, administration, designs, and so on. Like I'm not expecting any of the listeners to be an expert in Ansible after this session, but I hope that this will spark interest in this technology, because I think that's a very good, very easy to use, easy to set up solution, which just should be more popular, I guess. And I just like to support everything that has even the littlest connection with open source. So that's just how it is. So anyway, let's begin with what is Ansible. So there's this very nice definition which is available online and which is using some very nice words, and it's very wise and very knowledgeable sounding. And it says, Ansible is an open source provisioning, configuration, and management tool. And that's all. So now translating it to simple English or to something that's easier to grasp, Ansible, you can look at it as a system of scripting, because it's not an automation tool such as vRealize automation or any of these very high level enterprise level automation tools. It's more of a good and quick, good and dirty tool to set up automation in a very simple way, a way which does not require much of preparation or much of an investment. And that's mostly because Ansible is a free tool. That's it. You just don't pay a single penny to get it up and running. You also don't need any particular hardware. You don't have to worry about servers for Ansible. Ideally, Ansible should be run from just a regular box, some Linux VM or a Linux endpoint, and you just go ahead and do whatever. So this is accomplished mostly because Ansible is a very light tool. It uses two main things. It uses SSH protected by SSL, and it uses YAM files or YAML files. So the SSH bit is obviously used to establish secure connections to the endpoints that we want to automate, manage, and provision. As I said, these connections are and must be protected with SSL. So we'll get to that later, but it's not possible to use Ansible with SSH just protected with regular passwords. You actually have to set up SSL for the authentication to be passwordless for Ansible to work, which in my mind is an advantage if you think about it, because opening up SSH in the simple way usually is considered nowadays to be a security threat. While when you're forced to use SSL, it's a bit more secure. Like obviously you still have to remember about a separate network, or in production to only enable it for the actual automation work to be carried out and then disable it back. But it's just nice that it does not allow you to do SSH as you shouldn't be doing it anymore. The second bit, which is the YAM files. I'm not really sure about the pronunciation, so excuse me if it's not totally clear. YAM files are files used to do pretty much everything in Ansible. I mean, except for maybe two main configuration files, you use it for every single functionality of Ansible. We're going to talk about each of these components at a later stage, but Ansible is made up of a few main components. So you have the two configuration files, you have the ansible.cfg, and you have the inventory file, and then you have playbooks, roles, variables, vaults, and so on. So everything except the inventory and the ansible.cfg is based on YAML. And now YAML as a declarative language could be compared to CSS maybe. That's very pushing it, but essentially it's a language used to declare stuff, to describe what you want to do. And YAML was built with an idea of making those files very readable, very accessible. So a person who never programmed a single file in his life, or it's not even from IT, should be able to just look at a YAML file and say, okay, I have a general idea of what it's supposed to be doing. And again, we'll get to some examples of YAML files later on. So for now, let's just stick with this. Now, because of how Ansible operates and what it's based on, as in SSH and YAML, it's very easy to use with multiple different hardware and software solutions. Essentially, wherever there is some sort of Unix background, there is an Ansible compatibility. So vCenter server, ESXi, NSX, SRM, Kubernetes, of course, all of these can be easily managed with Ansible by definition. So you can do pretty much anything that you can normally do from an SSH session on these boxes using Ansible. And on top of it, Ansible provides modules, to which we'll get on later as well, which allows you to carry out tasks simpler, easier, and so on. So yeah, let's see now. All right, so with that little introduction, we can move on to the actual installation configuration of Ansible, which will also include a little bit of the basics of Ansible. So we're going to go back to the files which I mentioned previously, such as playbooks and var files. And the first step to begin working with Ansible is, as I mentioned, get some sort of box which can be used as an Ansible server or Ansible controller. And this could be any Linux box, Macintosh endpoint, or a Windows box. However, the Windows version is pretty much complicated, so I'm not going to even bother trying to explain it now. So what you see in front of you right now are the commands that you need to issue to get Ansible installed. It's a small application which shouldn't take more than 5 minutes to install. And obviously you don't have to issue all of these commands. These are just examples of how easy it is to install Ansible on many different flavors of endpoints that you could have. So You have the yum for Red Hat, DNF for Fedora, pacman for Arc, pip for Mac OS, pickle for whatever, and that's it. You just run that one command. Ansible stack is downloaded from the actual base repositories. You don't have to add. I think in 95% of the cases, you don't have to add any extra repositories. It's just available in the same repo as kernel and any other base packages for Linux and for Macintosh as well. So, well, okay, for Macintosh, you have to get pip first, but that's just Macintosh for you. So you install Ansible, and if you would plan to only use Ansible for the automation of Linux boxes and appliances which are just not VMware, that's all you have to do. But for the actual VMware, you have to get one additional thing, and that is the pyvm oni. It's the command at the bottom. It's the same command for every OS, because what pyvmoni or pyvmoni, or however you want to pronounce it, is a VMware Python SDK. So that's required to run the actual modules written for the ESXi, vCenter, and so on and so on. And I'm not going to get into too much details why this is the case, but essentially because of how VMware software is designed, you don't really run the commands on the OS level. You need to have the actual like translation bit between the command and the actual VMware stack. So just an example, if you connect now to an ESXi box with a SSH, you won't be able to create VMs straight away just by issuing some sort of bash command. So that's why you need the SDK installed. That's not the case on, I don't know, KVM, because KVM allows you to do pretty much anything that you can do with any sort of GUI from a terminal as well. So you don't need any additional software installed on top of it, but that's okay. It's not hard. That module, again, is like 5 megs. So overall, the installation on your management client shouldn't take longer than 10 minutes. Now, I don't think there is any reason to go overboard with the actual client or the management host for Ansible. I mean, because of Ansible operates, you don't really need any sort of redundancy or any fancy technology behind the actual management box. As I said, it could even be a laptop running Linux, and that's what I do. Anyway, anything else than a simple VM will do. So you don't really have to do anything in that sense. However, if you want to really get into Ansible and say that you want to run it in business environment and you want to protect it and make sure that, you know, your work doesn't get lost, then maybe the only thing I would recommend is getting some sort of storage solution which would be then used for hosting the actual Ansible configuration files, playbooks, and so on. Or you can just back it up. That's totally up to you. Anyway, so the server side, as I said, because Ansible is only using SSH, and that's pretty much it in terms of connecting to the actual hosts to be managed and to be automated, you don't need to do anything on the server side. Ansible is pretty much agentless, and you just point Ansible to the boxes that you want to manage. So in that sense, the only thing which is really required on the server side is to get the IP addresses or the host names of the boxes, because you need to tell Ansible engine where to look for the boxes that you want to manage. And because it's based on SSH, you might have to enable SSH or do some sort of steps necessary to get the SSH actually working and configured. It's actually a bit trickier with the VMware software, with the VMware solutions, ESX and vCenter and so on. we'll get to it later, is just because neither ESXi or vCenter or any other VMware solution is not really Linux. They're based on Linux, they're based on Unix, but they're not really Linux, so not everything works as on Linux. But that's just one thing which isn't too complicated. And again, we'll get to it later. What is very cool about Ansible, and that's just the last thing I'm going to mention on this slide, is that because it's so simple and it only requires SSH and Python really to work, you don't have to prepare the boxes, as I said. And on some boxes, you would have to prepare Python, but in terms of VMware, you don't have to do it either. So it's just another reason for just giving Ansible a shot. So having that said, let's move on to the first configuration file that we need to think about when setting up and using Ansible. And that configuration file is inventory, or sometimes referred to as hosts file. So inventory basically lists the endpoints that you want to manage, automate, or provision. There are many ways to do that, and it's visible on the screen right now, and we're going to go through every single way of describing your endpoints in the inventory file. So the easiest way to do that is just to list the IP addresses or the host names of the boxes that you want to manage. So that's the ESXi-prod group. Oh yeah, by the way, those names in brackets are the groups. So you don't refer to the endpoints later on when writing or using playbooks. One by one, you use the groups instead. So the first box, so the first group is these, is the one which is using the simplest method. We just have the 3 host names declared in plain text in the inventory file one by one. Then the second bit, the ESXi no-prod, non-prod children, that's the nesting or the children technology in the inventory. So the ESXi non-prod group has 2 groups as its children, and that's ESXi test and ESXi dev. Again, pretty straightforward. What it means is when we run a playbook or a script against the ESXi-non-prod, it actually runs it against all the endpoints that we declared in the ESXi dev and ESXi test. Then ESXi test is just the same thing, but with IP addresses, because we can use either. And lastly, ESXi dev is using a wildcard. So the bit in the brackets, the 01 colon 10, that's actually referring to a group of hosts. And Ansible is smart enough to know that if we do it like this, it means that there is a host called ESX-dev01, then 02, and 03, blah, 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 all the way to 10. That just simplifies the setup and allows you to have simpler inventory files. And that's pretty much important when you have loads of clients to manage. So let's do a quick cleanup. There we go. So now we have the first group referred with the wildcard as well. So it goes from ESXi 01 all the way to ESXi 03. Then the ESXi test group also has a wildcard, which proves that you can use it in IP addresses as well. And the ESXi dev group remains as it is. Now, a thing which I would like to mention at this point, which I'm not going to go through in detail because we don't have enough time, is that with Ansible for VMware, we can actually use a plugin which automatically detects all the ESXi hosts connected to the vCenter. But again, it's simple, it's in the documentation, it's basically a one-liner, but it will involve some stuff which I don't want to go into. So just to keep in mind that you don't really have to list everything one by one with VMware endpoints at least. So the second configuration file is the ansible.cfg. So ansible.cfg hosts holds all the actual configuration bits for Ansible. So we have the location of the inventory list, which we've talked about just a second ago. And as you can see here, it's referred to as both inventory and hosts. So just in case there's any confusion, both these names are actually referring to the list of endpoints that we want to manage. So we're using Ansible CFG. We define where the inventory is, and we can define all the other different variables for Ansible. So we can change which user is used for logging onto the boxes. We can change how many Ansible tasks can be run at the same time. We can change, what else can we change? We can change if changing the user within playbooks is allowed. We can select if we allow sudo to be used, and so on, so on. So the default Ansible.cfg file is located in -etc, /etc/Ansible/Ansible.cfg. And that file is read by default whenever you run any of the Ansible commands, but you can have many copies of Ansible.cfg. So you can have a copy if you're in your, I don't know, documents folder, then another CFG somewhere else. And Ansible is always set to look for the closest CFG, or you can define which CFG you want to use. So it's very simple to have multiple CFGs for different kind of hosts or host groups that you want to manage. So for instance, I could have a folder which is called production, and then I have production.cfg, and then I could have a folder test with test CFG. Ansible will always look for the CFG which is closest. So to swap these, all I'd have to do is just to move between those directories that I just mentioned. It's very simple, it's very clear, and the documentation for Ansible describes very well what each of the variables do and how to set up different settings in the file. So now the important bit, the last bit of the actual installation, is the SSL key-based SSH authentication. So that's done on most Linux boxes with 3 commands, and they're visible right here. So we have the SSH keygen, which generates an SSL key. It actually generates 2 keys. So it's generating a public and a private SSL key. And the private one stays on your box, it's secret, and the public one goes over to the boxes that you want to establish an SSL authentication with. It's all SSL theory, so I'm not going to explain it in huge detail, but essentially the 2 boxes using SSL for authentication exchange the keys with each other. So the box A gives the public key to the box B verifies it, gives the public key to its public key to box A, blah, 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 and they're secured, they can connect. So after generating your SSL key with SSH keygen, we can add it to the SSH agent, which is done with the SSH-add. And that's, again, simple. It's not really required, but it's good to do. And then lastly, the SSH copy ID copies the key that we just added to the SSH agent and copies it over to the box that we specify as an argument. So in this example, I'm copying the key for the user Wilk to the box dns01.ssh.lab. And then I just supply it with the user password for the actual user Wilk at the, and then the keys are exchanged. And from this moment onwards, you can log on to the box, the DNS01 in that example, with SSH without providing password. So these are the commands that we talked about, again, in a bit clearer. So we have the keygen, the add, and the copy ID. And now the thing with the last command, and that's what I mentioned at the beginning of the session, and that's where the VMware stack proves to be different from how Linux generally operates, because the last command can't be actually used on the VMware stack. What you have to do is issue a bit less a bit less nice looking command. So what you actually do is you do this. That's actually one of the options what you can do. And what it does, it's basically copying the public key over to the authorized keys file on the ESXi host or the vCenter server or whatever. So that one-liner does that in a single step, but you could also copy it manually, open a file on the ESXi host and just do it manually. But I prefer to have stuff working of a single line command. So that's what it does. It cuts over the public file, pushes it through the pipe over to the SSH, which connects to the ESXi host, and then the SSH connection to the ESXi host is set to run a command on connection, which is cat, again, piped into the authorized key file. Feel free to take a screenshot if you need it for future reference. Anyway, that's how it works on the actual ESX box. So again, we generate a key. In that example, I'm generating it for the root user account because I didn't bother to set up a dedicated user on my ESXi box. So I'm just using root. It's perfectly acceptable to use a different user. It's just a matter of making the setup fancier. But if you don't want to do that, you can just stick to this. So you generate an SSL key, again, add it to the agent, and then push it over with the fancy command, one-liner, cat, blah, blah, blah. Done. So what we've talked about so far is how you configure Ansible, and we have that all done, essentially. So now we can move on to actually how you use Ansible and how you can utilize it. So the first two things is getting info about the boxes that you manage and running commands called ad hoc. So what the ad hoc is a command that you push with Ansible on a one-off basis. So this is something that you won't be doing very often. So let's just go forward here. So the first one on the top is an ad hoc command, and what it does, it's restarting all the hosts in the Atlanta group with the sbin/reboot command. That's about it. You have your inventory file. In the inventory file, you define a group called Atlanta, you add your hosts, and with this simple command, you can reboot them all automatically or just straight away. So, and that command would work on ESXi, and that's cool because some of ad hoc commands won't really work with ESXi's, again, because of how ESXi operates and how it's a little different from the regular Linux boxes. Then the second command, that's more Linux based. However, it should work on ESXi as well. I mean, it's not recommended to do that, but we can try. So the second one is also an ad hoc command, which restarts the service. Oh no, it doesn't restart. It stops the HTTPD service in the pickle host group. So again, it's very simple. Now, the only thing which is different from the second command in comparison with the first one is that the first one is as simple as it gets in terms of ad hoc commands, because it basically just pushes out a command to the boxes. The second one actually uses something that we'll talk about at a later stage, and that's a module. So a module is a way for Ansible to perform tasks which would require many complicated commands in just some very quick, very easy to understand steps. So modules will be mostly used in playbook. So that's why I don't want to get into details as of yet. And then lastly, the Ansible all-m setup command is something that will be mostly used by people who want to develop their own playbooks, because what this does, it's getting the info about all the hosts and displays them like that. So these are Ansible facts. Again, we're just going to blast through it. So Ansible facts are variables that are visible to Ansible on each host, and these can be used in scripting. So by doing the Ansible-m setup ad hoc command, you get all these facts about the boxes displayed on the screen. And for instance, you can use, let's see what's on the screenshot. Oh, there we go. So for example, we have the Ansible at the very bottom, we have the Ansible underscore DNS, name servers, blah, blah, blah. So that would allow us in a playbook script to use a variable called Ansible DNS name servers to refer to both of these IP addresses without actually knowing them or without actually writing them in the script. So speaking about the playbooks and facts, I think it's the high time to move on to them because it's been over half an hour now. Jesus. Anyway, so playbooks. Playbooks are little scripts, and those little scripts are the main functionality of Ansible. So finally, we have those YAML files that I talked about, and this is an example of a YAML file, a very simple YAML file. All it does is creating a new VM using a template in our vCenter server. So it's using the module called VMware Guest. You can see it underneath the tasks task part of the playbook. And again, it just asks for some simple stuff that you fill in, and then it does its thing on the vSphere stack. The basic parts of the playbook, which are very important, are the hosts, which are the actual boxes that we want to run this against. So here you would put either a name of a single box if you really want to run it only on a single box, or a name of a group, or just use one of the pre-built groups such as all, as we used it before. And then the remote user is what user we want to run the commands as. In terms of VMware, it's always good to use the root account. Anyway, the VMware guest module, as you can see, it asks for a host name, it asks for a username, it asks for a password. It's all very unsecure and very not nice. So as I said, this is a very simple playbook because a proper playbook would look like that. So now it's looking much more terrifying, I guess, but it's good. It just proves that Ansible is not really as simple as it may look like, while it's perfectly capable of doing very fancy stuff. So in this example, what the script does, if I remember correctly, it changes the ESXi login level. And it does that through the HTTP API. That, I know it looks a bit terrifying, but it's all very well described on the Ansible documentation for the VMware modules. So it's really not hard to write a playbook like that. Anyway, what I wanted to talk about here is the vars file. You see that on the top there. It's actually used for storing the passwords in a secure way. So instead of typing the hostname, username, and password in plain text as on the simple playbook, in here we're referring to the vCenter server, the username and password with those little brackets, and then vCenter server, I think it's in nearly every line. There is something like that. The first one is in the URI module at the very top. It says URL, HTTPS, blah, 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 brackets, vCenter server, brackets. So that's a variable. It's getting that variable from the vars file vCenter underscore vars YML. And this is an encrypted file which holds the secure data securely. So again, sorry for rushing through, but Ansible is just a very long topic. Anyway, so that's how you create an encrypted YML or a vault to hold data such as passwords or host names and stuff. So at the very top, we have the actual content of the vCenter underscore vars.yml file. And as you can see, it's just according with the YAML syntax, it's just declaring 3 variables, the server, the username, and the pass. And then the Ansible vault command in the step number 2 is encrypting the vCenter vars file. It asks me for a vault password, which I provide in the console, and then the encryption is successful. And then whenever you try to just cut the file without actually providing the password, you end up getting gibberish instead of the actual data. So it's very, very, very late and we're rushing through, but we'll get it done. So Ansible Galaxy and Ansible Docs is what you will probably be using if you're not a programmer, because Ansible Galaxy is a huge repository of all the modules used for VMware. So I've shown before the modules used for using the HTTP API and for managing the actual VMs in VMware. What Galaxy provides you, and Galaxy is just a very nice little portal there. What it provides you are playbooks and modules written by the community. So, for example, for VMware, if we look in here, boom, that's all the VMware modules just written by one community. Those are not even all of them. So as you can see, we have the VCA underscore VAP for managing vCloud Air VApp instances. We have the vSuite facts for getting facts, as I've shown before, about the virtual switches in vSphere. We have the module for the maintenance mode. We have the module for data center management or for the guest disk management. So what you do, you go onto Galaxy, you search for a module that would do what you need, you pull it, and then you just follow very simple instructions on how to use it. You create a playbook, and sometimes you don't even have to create a playbook. It comes with the module, so you just type in, I don't know, your basic info that's required by the script, and it just runs. It's as simple as it gets. And then you can merge the modules and do some advanced funny stuff. But again, this is a crash course on the basics, so we're not going to get into that. Now, the last thing which we will cover in this session is the docs. So we have the Ansible docs available on the internet on docs.ansible.com. It teaches pretty much everything about Ansible, and it explains all the built-in modules for Ansible. It provides examples, how to use them, how to use the modules with other modules, and so on, so on, so on. So it's a brilliant piece of documentation. I really recommend looking into it if you want to get started with Ansible. The second thing is Ansible.docs/docs command. And this command is just an offline version available in the terminal of the docs.ansible.com. And now a tip for anyone that would like to ever do Ansible exam, Ansible-docs is available on every workstation which is used for Ansible exams. So whenever you get stuck, you can do Ansible-docs and then, for example, a module name, and it gives you the whole page from the official documentation. It's brilliant. Lastly, we have the man files. Obviously, we have the man for Ansible playbook, man for Ansible Vault, and these are just very good to look into as well. Yeah, so I was planning to do thoughts and questions, but it seems like we are absolutely running out of time. So uh, I'd like to thank everyone for listening to this. I'm sorry if it was a little bit brief, but again, this session was mostly about sparking interest. I would never even hope to teach you everything about Ansible or even teach you anything at all, really, about Ansible. I just hope that it gave you an idea of what you can achieve with Ansible and that it might be a good tool for you to look into for your designs, for your home lab work, for your test environments. Just give it a shot. It's something which is also kind of a community work, even though nowadays it's associated with Red Hat, the company. But at the end of the day, it's an open source thing, and contributing to open source is always a good idea. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.